Welcome to Secure My Treasure's first podcast. My name is Shar Weeks, and I'm the founder and director of Secure My Treasures. Secure My Treasures is committed to supporting people to remain independent and in control of their lives. So it goes without saying, this podcast series is focused on helping to plan and make good decisions about what's important to older people in later life. Most of you will know that searching for a hidden will, lost shares, or lost last wishes is an emotional nightmare. Secure My Treasures solves that problem when your critical information is stored in our secure chests and you authorize 2 or 3 people that you trust to access your information in any emergency. Now, our very first guest, we're delighted to have with us Danielle Phillips from South Australia. Danielle knows a lot about the perils of trying to navigate the system to track down elusive information after a loved one has passed away. An only child, Danielle sadly lost both of her parents during the COVID-19 pandemic. That was probably the most difficult time of her life. In executing her parents' wills, Danielle found herself searching for the right information at the mercy of an obstructive administrative process, endured long waits on hold, received incorrect information sometimes, and spent weeks following up on a mountain of paperwork. Hardly ideal at such a difficult time. Driven by the frustration of it all and the realization that no one should be subject to bungles of bureaucracy, Danielle founded Sage Executor Solutions. Wow, Danielle. Most of us feel honored to be invited to be an executor of a will. Could you share some insights into who we choose and why?
Sure. Thanks for having me, Shar. It's great to be here. I would love to share some insights. Commonly tend to appoint an executor of our will who we feel to be responsible, organized, well-rounded in their administrative skills. And so a lot of people will find themselves actually being appointed executor multiple times because of those qualities. What a lot of people don't often check in on with the executor is their actual technical abilities. Do they have mobility issues? A lot of the executor responsibilities involve going into banks and government agencies. So if you've appointed an executor when they were more mobile and they're now in their senior years, it can be a difficult process for them. That's another reason why it is important to review and evaluate who you have appointed as your executor, even at the time. If they seemed ideal, it's certainly something that should be reviewed.
I wonder how many people actually understand what they're getting themselves into when they accept this honor.
People do not realize the mountain and myriad of paperwork, responsibilities, and processes that come with the role. I'm actually holding quite a few masterclasses and courses on the topic since I established the business, and the feedback that I get from the various participants are at the end of the course, they had absolutely no idea of the complexities and the commitment, particularly the time commitment, perseverance, and follow-up required. As part of the business and the service that I offer, we go through a complimentary consultation, which entails about 40 different checklist items. People often think it's just a notify the bank, notify super, and sell a property tick and flick exercise. But at the end of the consultation, we've gone through 40 different items and drilled down to things like removal from the electoral roll. There's really nothing worse than receiving a fine from the Electoral Commission when someone's passed away because they didn't vote. So at the end of this consultation, the executor does become a lot more, I suppose, informed as to what that commitment looks like. They can at least brace themselves and have a little bit more insight as to what the next few weeks or months will look like for them. It's fraught with trips and falls and follow-up, and that can be really hard for people that have other dependents and careers, children and responsibilities, because it does become almost a full-time job.
Mm. Oh, none of us know where to go to get help, except we now know about you.
Yes, and that's really where I saw a gap in the human journey. From my own experience, there was fantastic probate lawyers and financial planners and funeral directors, but no one that really sat in that space in between. That space in between is really what takes up the majority of your time, because you're a call to Centrelink or Telstra or an energy provider is not a quick, fun and easy call. And often that follows with its own paperwork and documentation that needs to be filled out and witnessed and certified. So it's certainly not the tick of flick exercise that people expect it to be. That middle space is certainly what takes up the majority of the 200 to 300 hours that statistically it can take an executor to do.
So it does take a very long time, to 300 hours out of someone's life to do a favour for someone they loved. It is a big ask. I wonder if you could fill us in on some of the key responsibilities of an executor and what happens if an executor decides to withdraw or passes away.
So I guess the first point to make is if we have an executor, that's a great start because that means a will is in place. So the next step for the executor really is to look at getting a grant of probate, which is a fundamental for the executor to administer the estate. The court will actually review the will and make sure it's valid and that the executor is appointed to administer the estate. From there, everything tends to unfold, such as selling or transferring shares to beneficiaries, opening deceased estate bank accounts for funds to go into, selling or transferring property into the beneficiaries' names. Then we've got the smaller items that, as I mentioned before, electoral rolls and mail redirections, notifying insurance providers, updating utility providers. And there's little traps with insurance providers that if you're not updating, for instance, the home insurer, and a property's left vacant and there's an incident, you may have a claim void or not honoured, because if the insurance provider isn't aware that it's a vacant property or a deceased estate, they could actually deny a claim. So there's all of these nuances within those four banners as property, legal, financial and personal. Without going through all of them, there's an incredible amount of attention to detail required to administer each of those items, and even superannuations as executors are working through with the next of kin or family member having a superannuation claim and death benefit put through, but people are about to get this lump sum dropped into their bank account. If they're on a Centrelink entitlement or they're not dependent or interdependent, there can be huge financial and tax implications. It's also about reaching out to the right advisors, tax accountants, financial planners, and probate lawyers, and that all kind of falls on the executor's shoulders as well. Now, if an executor does decide that that's not something that they want to take on, they can renounce their role. The process from there gets a little more convoluted because without a valid executor, we need to engage in what we call letters of administration, where the courts will then appoint a new administrator of the estate. And it's actually a next of kin, normally the spouse, that would apply for that role. But as you can imagine, Shav, we've got blended families, we've got children and wives of past relationships all putting their hand up to want to administer the estate. It can cause a lot of family conflict. So circling back to making sure that you've got the right executor appointed so that there is no renunciation that happens.
I thought it'd be more straightforward than that, but it certainly sounds complicated. I wonder sometimes if it isn't very difficult to get to the bottom of where a loved one who's no longer with us has actually stored their information.
That's certainly a very difficult exercise, especially if they don't have someone that is in regular contact with them. Some people have estranged families. We always say check their fridge, check their hall stand. If you can possibly get access to their email, a lot of people are receiving bills and memberships and updates to their email. But really, this is the key consideration with Secure My Treasures. If you have an online vault where you can have all of this information digitally and safely stored with an appointed or multiple appointed people to access, It makes it so much easier for that family member or executor to step in and administer the estate and make sure that everything's securely tied up. It's really important, I believe, when you have the conversation with the executor about their appointment, that you also start discussing where all of these copies of accounts, policies, logins, and IDs are held, and hence the Secure My Treasures portal is so important.
Thank you so much for that. And it is my experience that people hide different things in different places for different reasons.
Yeah.
You've been very successful, though, in helping people to unearth wills, bank accounts, super, shares, insurances, and whatever else. Much of the distress and confusion about what to do and what not to do could be avoided, you say, if they develop an executive plan. Does it really make it easier for an executor?
Yeah, absolutely. If we can do a lot of the groundwork while the testator, which is the person that's written the will, and their executor are open to conversations about where documents are stored and what logins are, all of that groundwork is cut out so that when a person has passed away and the executor has to step in and mobilize, they're not only dealing with all of the administrative items, but we need to remember that they're likely dealing with a lot of grief themselves. So having a really clear roadmap, which is part of the offering provide, is going through that list of 40 items with the executor and the testator and checking, do they have copies of policies and account numbers, and do they have the correct ID on hand? Superannuation companies need a marriage certificate before they will transfer a superannuation death benefit to the spouse. Some people have lost their marriage certificates years ago. So as part of our planning, we make sure that we've got all of that and can apply to births, deaths and marriages for those certificates in advance rather than figuring it out after the person's passed away that it doesn't exist and then we're trying to turn the house upside down to find it. We do go through the list of 40 items. We put together what I call an executor's manual or a DIY roadmap where it's very much a point and click. For instance, if they're with AGL for their electricity and gas, the plan will include the actual steps to follow for AGL, the forms they need filled out, their bereavement department's phone number and email, and the steps so that you can get it all done without trawling through their website trying to find the right information. Because really, it's the procurement and sourcing of the documentation that takes the longest time. So that's why we're very nuanced and detailed in those roadmaps.
I feel like everyone needs one. How do listeners develop or get hold of an executive plan?
Well, I'm more than happy to have a chat with anyone that wants to understand how that may benefit them and their families. They can reach out to me via my website. Happy to take a call at any time. It's effectively probably a 1.5 hour call followed by a personalized consultation plan, which you can keep, you can update. And then at the time when your executor needs to use the plan to step in and mobilize to follow those items, if they feel that they don't have the capacity to do it, they can reach out to me and I'll step in and take over for them. So that's where I'm doing the pre and post executor support from my experience. The one thing that I would have loved to have done is just delegate and outsource all of those phone calls, the notifications, waiting on hold for hours, and just be able to invest a bit more in my mental and emotional health. And I think that when you do find yourself in that executor role, the question does come across your mind, how can I outsource? How can I get my life back? More than happy to step in to take over those roadmaps for anyone that has one curated for them.
And that's great news for all our listeners. So I wondered, Danielle, if you could tell our listeners how they can actually contact you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Shah. I am contactable through my website, which is www.sageexecutorsolutions.com.au. And my number is 0407 786 486. Please reach out and I would be more than happy to have a chat about any of the solutions or services you may wish to explore for pre-planning, or if you have experienced a loss, I'm available to help lift that load off your shoulders.
Danielle, you are a remarkable woman. Thanks for joining us today to shine a light on executive function. And thank you to all our listeners who joined us today. Please head over to the Secure My Treasures YouTube channel to listen to this podcast or find out more, including about Danielle's Secure My Treasures, www.securemytreasures.com.